Welcome, everybody. This is the fourth annual BigBlueButton World Conference online. Very happy to start off with a keynote address with Jon Fila. Allow me to introduce Jon to all of you. Jon is an award-winning educator, speaker, and author who promotes equitable access to high-quality educational materials and experiences for all learners. Jon has led digital initiatives, accessibility initiatives, developed curriculum, and facilitated adoption and update of open educational resources. He has written books on the use of AI in education, and Jon also serves as an educational consultant, providing presentations and workshops here for school districts and organizations around the world. Jon was a 2002 Minnesota Teacher of the Year finalist. We're all rooting for you in 2004. He also offers workshops and training through his website, inclusiveaistrategies.com. So on a personal note, Jon and I have known each other for a couple of years. I had the pleasure of attending a workshop that he gave at DLAC earlier this year, full half-day workshop on using AI in education. And I'm really glad that he is here to share his experience with our community. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Jon. Jon, the virtual stage is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me today to kick off the conference. So this one's exciting for me because of my roots in open source software. They go back quite a few years as a teacher struggling to find solutions for my learners in alternative settings without much of a budget. But we had a really strong desire to create the high quality online engagements with our learners. So as I move forward today, please feel free to interrupt in the chat. And then I'll try to make sure I get to as many of those as I can as well. But just to give you a brief highlight into my background, 2022 Teacher of the Year finalist. So that one, just clarify that a little bit. So in my last 25 years of teaching, I've only spent 1 year in traditional public education. The rest of my time has been in unique alternative learning environments to serve the needs of low incidence and marginalized student populations. So I currently teach English for Northern Star Online. It's an asynchronous supplemental online program that serves throughout the state of Minnesota. And I've been involved in blended and online learning as some part of my role now for a lot of those 25 years. So because of my background in those areas, those different programs, restorative practices, I've developed some insights, and I try to do my best to share with colleagues around the country, around the world, just through my own writing, my own consulting. So I got started in open educational resources, instructional design. I created a course sharing platform so people could share Moodle courses over a decade ago that evolved into something called the Minnesota Partnership for Collaborative Curriculum. And so I've done accessibility work recognized by CAST, and so I've got a long background in ed tech as well as serving the challenging learning environments and situations. So I'm learning everything I could, but I made a lot of mistakes, right? So as I have conversations with educators around the country, I started writing, primarily I was writing guidance for students on how to use AI. And then it turned into writing some more support for teachers and then just educators in general. But my hope today is to set the tone for the framework for how we might think about these tools. We'll get into some examples of actual things I'm doing, but really I focus on mindset because there are enough people out there doing the cheerleading for AI and talking about all the great ways, exciting ways that you can use it. But I have some really strong concerns about how we do that I think we all need to be aware of. So through my AI journey, I've spent most of my time writing and presenting about the implicit bias inherent in AI responses, the lack of sufficient responses that lead us to real solutions. And then also what we can do to achieve better results and get us closer to something that aligns with our values, the values of our organizations. And so when I phrase it like that, it doesn't really seem all that different from any other solution we've been sold for decades now. AI is just the latest in a long line of software that if used without sufficient care and attention, it will set our learners back. So A lot of the images in the presentation today I created with Midjourney or some other AI image generator. This was my attempt at creating the homework apocalypse. We keep hearing the phrase unprecedented in education. We are facing all these unprecedented events, and it seems to be that we're facing unprecedented events faster and faster and faster. So we've got this unprecedented level of unprecedentedness, and the AI disruption has felt different though, right? It's speeding up the rate of these changes. So I'll spend some time talking about a lot of the time the large language models like Claude, ChatGPT, some of the higher performing ones like that when I talk. So consider this. There's nothing inherently human about teaching how to read and write other than we just evolved into it. So right now we encourage students to use spell check and grammar check, but there was a time when even that was controversial, and English teachers especially didn't think we would need to teach students how to spell check or learn how to spell anymore because we had these tools available. And even now we ask them, like, did you paste your writing into Hemingway app or Grammarly or whatever it might be, right? But since humans have figured out how to use symbols to represent sounds, we've been evolving our relationship with information, how we share it, how we access it, and how we use it. And it's not really about writing for documentation and for the future anymore. We can actually find new ways of analyzing and interacting with it through these large language models. So we're not just learning it, we're actively trying to determine what does it mean. So I don't fear the homework apocalypse that there have been articles about. I've wanted to do away with homework for a long time now anyway. But this disruption has done in just 2 short years what I've been trying to achieve for over 25 years, right? To really get us to think about what we're doing in the field of education and what the real purpose of school has been and what it should be. And so I'm grateful for that disruption. But let's look at this for a second. So if we can have AI develop instructional content, and then we can have learners use the AI to submit their assignments, and then we could have AI feedback generated on those AI submissions for that AI content, then what's really the point of all of it, right? So we finally have an opportunity to take a deeper look into what we should spend our time doing. And so that's scary, but it's also really liberating at the same time. We really can rethink what the purpose of all of this is with the time we have with our learners. But that can also be really overwhelming, right? Like, so in my social media feed, I'm constantly seeing things like, did you learn the 120 mind-blowing AI tools, to enhance your teaching? Or if you're not using these 50 AI tools, you're falling behind. So while all these people on social media are kind of freaking out about that, there's an enormous workload to consider, right? The feeling of not being enough. If that's manipulated in just the right way, it makes some people a lot of money. And we can see which of these vendors are kind of rising to the top, right? Becoming more and more popular. Almost every one of these tools exists to make someone money. So that's another good mindset to go into with this. They'll sell us all kinds of things to get us to where we think we need to be, but it's all an illusion, right? A lot of the tools that are out there now are just fancy wrappers for ChatGPT or Claude. But the idea that there's something to fear or fight keeps us with our wallets open and looking for a solution. But oftentimes those kinds of solutions lead us further and further behind because it doesn't really address the core issue, just the symptoms. So if we let the weight of that stress us out, then we're in trouble. I'm comfortable being behind. In education, we are always behind. We will never not be behind. So we just have to be okay with that, right? So I think about my students. And last year I had a 12th grade student. And so I primarily was teaching English 12. The last class students in Minnesota needed to graduate. They put it off until the end. And this student in particular struggled since 3rd grade, right? So he had an individual education plan for ADHD, memory issues, anxiety, and he never, since 3rd grade, had a positive experience in school. And so I was talking to him about his struggles and what we might do move forward. So I created this assignment where students take a default prompt, they have ChatGPT give a response, and then they switch up their prompt to make it sound different. Just so I just basically I want them to know that a few changes to a prompt can get you wildly different results, right? So he's experimenting this and he's redoing it and trying to get it just the way he wants it to be. He liked, though, that it actually got him going, right? So we weren't talking about cheating. We weren't talking about doing it work for him. At this stage, we're just really talking about, a lot of students struggle with just staring at a blank page. And that can be the hardest part for them to overcome. And if we can get over that hump, especially for students who struggle with these kinds of issues, and then get them started, well, now he's got something that he can actually keep up with his colleagues on. The biggest barrier on this one was actually his parent. When I first approached his mom with the idea that he could maybe use ChatGPT to get things started, she was hesitant to do that, right? So, but then eventually through our conversations, she decided that it's here to stay, right? So I was often saying, like, today's the worst it's ever going to be. Today's the worst we're ever going to be at using them. It's inevitable. And so talking to her, showing her some YouTube videos that I created, she ended up becoming my student in that area as well. So beyond the uses of the devices and software is our relationship with them. So this means a lot of focus for me on media literacy and an understanding of the impact of how these resources fit into our lives and our work. But there are a lot of dangers with artificial intelligence doing our thinking for us. Frank Herbert warned us about that in his Dune novels, right? AI is not innovative or progressive. It's grounded in the past, right? It's heavily influenced by our past biases and our mistakes. We'll get into that a little bit later. But what I fear the most is the stagnation, right? If we're having it do things like, I see guidance for teachers that we could have it write students' first drafts for them. I'm not a proponent of that. I think the first draft is one of the most important elements of the writing process, where the students are wrestling with the topics and their relationship with that information and how they're going to organize it. I want them doing that first draft. So I don't want to lead into the stagnation where we get a bunch of first drafts that all sound the same. So let's think about why we would want to get involved in a topic like AI and education to begin with. And so I created this image because I just thought one day when I was sitting down at my computer, wouldn't it be cute to see a baby buffalo that could fit in the palm of your hand, right? And we know that there are news agencies now that are slow to report on topics because they have to independently verify if something's even true. The bridge collapse in Baltimore, for instance, they couldn't verify that the videos weren't AI generated. So they actually had to send someone down there to verify that it was really happening. So we have to be skeptical of everything now in ways that we haven't been before. We can't have the kinds of access to instant breaking news that we had before. So the knowledge of AI biases enables leaders to make informed decisions about technology adoption and curriculum development. These are things that we need to be aware of. We have to ensure that these tools don't perpetuate existing biases and creating new inequities. Our institutions have played a role in systemic inequities, and we have to identify what our role in that has been and prevent that. We have to implement strategies to counteract these biases. We want to ensure that curriculum and our communications reflect our diverse populations. We want to stay ahead of trends to prepare learners for a future where AI is ubiquitous, right? So, but here's the thing. We are not great at this. We don't have a good track record in education at doing those things. So what do, right? We still have to accept the inevitability that these things exist and that we have to do something about it. But people are going to use it anyway. So you've seen these kinds of images all over for most of your lives. The little dirt path that tells you a lot about human behavior. I think about these desire paths a lot in the context of my work. The city planning, the likely millions of dollars that went in, and the months and months that went into the planning of that big sidewalk you see to the left. And then what did people do? They decided, no, I'm going to walk this way. And then they created their own little dirt path that just completely rerouted the city planner's best intentions. So we have to think about what we're going to do about people's natural desire paths. What are they going to do anyway? And you could do your best to rope things off and keep people from going that way, but they're always going to thwart our plans for them if it's not something they already want to do. So we're always, as humans, looking for shortcuts. We're always trying to determine if our work matters, if it really means anything to someone. So the one on the right, the image on the right, that city just gave in, right? They created a separate little area that allowed for that desire path to exist. So in terms of AI and my success in the field of education with it, I'm not going to mourn the passing of the 5-paragraph theme, right? That's okay to me. I think it's fun to see what's going to happen next. Because if any student can just plug in a topic in a prompt and get a 5-paragraph essay cranked out, who cares about that anymore? I want to see, what do we do now that these tools exist in the world? So I think it helps to frame our thinking when it comes to these kinds of disruptive technologies. So like I said, we all sit on a continuum with our relationship to technology. And at some point, 40 to 50,000 years ago, human beings started displaying information outside of their own brains and in conversations. We painted on walls. We developed symbols to represent ideas, concepts that could be shared and transported, right? And the privileged few were allowed access to that knowledge. That evolution, aside from changing how we access information and share, it's limited because it still requires that we had people who could review and interpret the data. And now we have these incredible tools that can do some of this for us, but it comes at a cost. It was only 157 years ago that we even allowed all people in the United States to learn how to read and write. Like, that has been a closely guarded skill set because there's power in that, right? And so I think about that now. Who has access to the AI tools? Who has the training on how to use them? But these tools, and when I talk about that these tools come at a cost, they've been trained on us by us. And we don't have a good track record when it comes to being inclusive or even arriving at the right conclusion until after many iterations and attempts. So we have to find our ways around these biases if we're going to find value in the tools beyond just these generated walls of text or arriving at the right conclusions. We're going to have the same issues of access. We're same issues of power and control. Who gets to use the tools? Who are the ones training them, right? There's still a lot of questions on all of that. And what degree of training do they have? When we think about our work, what problems are there that the virtual classroom is trying to solve, right? In my mind, there's certainly issues around flexibility and access, credit requirements, credit options for students who don't have options to even take some of the classes that we might offer. Many of our students come to us because they're escaping unsafe situations, either medical issues, safety issues related to racism, safety issues related to homophobia and bullying in schools. So we have all of these reasons why students are coming to us, right? So we have to create flexible alternatives that allow for students to get their education in this way. So what part of the solution to those challenges can be enhanced with AI? So I think quite a few of them, but we have to really be careful because these tools exhibit the sycophancy, the idea that they will align wrongly with the user. So the person doing the prompting, these tools are disproportionately going to defer to the users, even if the users are inaccurate. right? And I can see why they might want to program them that way. And the more they try to solve this problem, the worse it actually has been getting. And some of this is from a study that Anthropic did, the creators of Claude. Why would you come back to use a tool if it was constantly pushing back on you and constantly disagreeing with you? So of course, it's going to be very gentle in how it defers to you. It will mimic your errors and give you some biased responses, because above all else, humans prefer responses that more closely align with their own beliefs. And you'd have to go pretty far down the list to get to something that was informative, rigorous, evidentially supported. So that the fact that it matches our beliefs is the biggest predictor of our preference. And so that's why these tools have engaged so many people. But the problem is that these tools don't really know anything, right? These AI machine learning models are trained using vast amounts of data sourced from human-generated content. And so if the data contains biases, the AI adopts and perpetuates those. It's like how a mirror reflects what's in front of it without judgment, right? The AI doesn't know in any human sense. It's replicating patterns it sees in data. But if we taught it white supremacy, homophobia, sexism, the list goes on, how are we actively directing it to eliminate those things and provide something more inclusive? It has been trained on the concepts of inclusivity. It has been trained, it can identify bias. It's just that by default, the overwhelming human sounding response is to give you that bias back. You have to kind of prompt around for that. So if you ask an image generator for a picture of an Indian person, you get these kinds of stereotypes, right? It's almost always an old man with a beard. If you ask it for a Mexican person, it's almost always a man in a sombrero. And that list goes on and on and on. And we can ask these image generators for a picture of a woman with a job and a family who's very busy. And we could do the same thing, and we just swap out the term woman for man, and we get wildly different images, right, that align with the stereotypes that we've seen. And there's so much of this already being documented online. And so I agree with Valeria's concern here, is that these AI tools have, because we are using them so much, because they're generating so much news, so many blogs, so much website content, so much social media content, so many lesson plans, that we are giving agency to these machines that are reflective of our own biases before we even given it to people. So I do have concerns that researchers are unable to generate some of the kinds of images they're asking it for if it doesn't align with the pre-existing biases of what the tools are trained on. So for instance, researchers were unable to get a popular image generator to create an image of a Black African doctor treating white children, regardless of how many times they changed their prompt. The prompts ended up just being wildly racist. So we need to learn how to create the type of inclusion in our AI responses to create a more diverse representation and more inclusive one. So if we think about what's going to get us the biggest gains, we have to start pushing back on the responses and including these in part of our prompts. So when we consider populations who've been marginalized and underrepresented, if you're not sure, you can ask the tools themselves, who am I leaving out, right? Which populations have been left out? Is there bias in this lesson? So I think we can use it as a check on ourselves as much as we are putting a check on the tools when we're using them. We can paste our lessons in and ask, are there examples of bias in this lesson? Whose voices have been left out? Who might need to be included? So we can, even if we live in a relatively homogeneous area, we can still benefit from diverse and multiple perspectives, right? That's good for everybody, according to research. It makes us all better problem solvers. It makes us all better members of a community. It makes us better innovators. So in our prompts, we can quite literally incorporate multiple perspectives that span race, gender, ability, culture, sexuality. We can have it include different family types, right? So if you come from a blended family where there's step siblings, those those families aren't always represented in a lot of the content we use. We can have it include anti-racist examples and use inclusive language. I'll often tell it to incorporate some social emotional learning framework, or I'll want it to incorporate some of the principles around universal design for learning when I'm trying to ensure that my content is accessible for learners. So there's a lot of different kinds of characteristics we can start to prompt when we're working with these tools. And so last year I was tasked, the fastest I ever wrote a year-long course, it took me a full calendar year. And last year I was tasked with writing 2 year-long courses within a school year, because I kind of helped with the estimate. We had decided that with the use of these tools, I should easily be twice as efficient, right? At least, maybe more. And what I found after spending hundreds, if not thousands of hours engaged with and working with these tools and reading studies about how they work and collaborating with colleagues, is that there's still a lot of layering that needs to happen to generate something that I would be comfortable putting in front of a learner, rather than just clicking a button, getting a lesson on an academic benchmark. I would never put that in front of a student. It's just not sufficient, right? But that's what we're being sold. So I want to think about how these kinds of additions impact all of our students, all of our colleagues in education. Fred doesn't probably remember, but so Fred Dixon, the one who introduced me here, the CEO of Blindside Networks, co-founder of Big Blue Button. When Big Blue Button first launched, I wanted to know all about it, right? I was really excited. I loved open source software. I just thought it was great to be part of that community. And I don't have a lot of technical aptitude for those kinds of things, but I'm fascinated by them and I use them and I want to know, right? So I joined the Google group and I still get updates for it, almost daily. I don't know a lot of the back-end server stuff. I was just learning the vocabulary around all that. The same way I struggled with Moodle when I first started getting into that and trying to install that on my own, because I just wanted to know everything about it. But I bring that up because I was fascinated by just how many different ways of messing up there were. So I watched Fred in all of these responses patiently explain to each individual what was going wrong, or how he tried to help them troubleshoot the issues. And I thought about that this morning, because a lot of what I'm doing right now with AI is that kind of process. I'm finding what works. I'm finding how to break things and finding solutions for that, right? So I love messing things up and figuring out what are we really getting at here. So when I encounter problems that people are finding, I found a lot of people that used something like ChatGPT or Claude didn't like it and they backed away. Well, I think why they backed away was because they understood at their core that those default responses were not sufficient. They weren't thinking, though, that there are certainly ways to get better at doing that, and even incorporating a phrase like, "This is vital to my career and I greatly value your thorough analysis and insights," will generate an 8 to 15% better, more contextualized response. If sometimes when I'm struggling with something and I just include that phrase, I get the response that I was looking for, especially when it comes to coding for some reason. So when I'm working with these tools and these circumstances, right? Sometimes people just need a little bit of help with just the right prompt, right? Just the right fix. And so I, for 30 years, more than 30 years now, 40 years, I've been I practiced martial arts, and I was a Jeet Kune Do instructor at one point in my life, and that was the style Bruce Lee developed. So he's been a big influence on me. But this quote of his about using no way as way, I think about that a lot. With all the variables involved, we have eliminated the possibility of a single way, right? And AI isn't great at that. AI wants to shoehorn things into a very narrowly defined structure. But we have to then understand that through all of our different student populations, through all of the different settings and configurations of those two things, there's a lot of limitation if we just let things kind of come to a solution, right? Anyone who tries to sell us a solution doesn't have it, right? We have to evolve faster. our expertise and oversight is an essential part of how successful we're going to be with these tools, or how much they might diminish us, right? So we have to be transparent. And that's one of the things that I try to focus on is my transparency, using my informed review with expertise. In 25 years of teaching English, no one in any job interview or any setting has ever asked me any questions about English language arts, right? Or cared about my expertise. They only cared about classroom management strategies and if I'm organized, am I sending students away a lot, or can I handle those issues in the classroom? I think that expertise matters more than ever now if we're going to be vetting these kinds of AI responses. Particularly, we want to work with teams of multiple people who can discuss and talk about how this impacts our learners in our settings. So it was and is imperative to figure out some of these challenges quickly for the thousands of students a year that we serve. So I want to make sure that we don't have a single way, that we don't have a single solution. And that's part of why I love open source software so much, right? Because there's like all these different ways of doing the same thing, and that drives some people nuts, I know, but it does, for me, allow the flexibility to do things that we weren't able to do before in very challenging and sometimes, situations where students needed an extra layer of security and safety. So I get all the challenges that you're facing today, right? We all need a little boost, and a lot of people are unsure of what to do. A lot of educators leaving the profession. And so we're looking for AI to do something, right? To do something to help us and figure out what we're struggling with. So we use it, we see what happens. And as long as you keep in mind that there's inherent barriers in how to overcome them, but some of them can be overcome, you all need a break today, right? AI tools can offer you that. And so I get the desire. So we'll make it do the heavy lifting sometimes. So our cognitive load is freed up for more creative tasks. You have the expertise, so save your energy for that. I was in a workshop with other English teachers, developing some common assessments around what we were identifying as these essential benchmarks. And that would have taken us probably more than half a day to identify those benchmarks and start writing what would become a common assessment. We had ChatGPT do those things in a few minutes, and then we spent the next few hours arguing, which for us was really enjoyable and fun. We liked pushing back on each other. We liked that kind of that back and forth. And what if this situation? What if this student population? What in this setting? And then trying to break the response, right? And until we came at something that we could edit and come together with. We never would have had the energy to do that and get as far as we did if we didn't first have ChatGPT provide some kind of framework for what that could look like for us to critique, right? If we're critiquing a machine response, nobody's feelings get hurt. We can slam on that all day long, and it's not going to run away and not help us anymore, right? It wants to help us. It's programmed to help us. So that's helpful, because now our emotions and feelings are taken out of it, and we can just start to wrestle with how to tweak it and make it better. Even though I said I don't like it when students use it as a first draft, I guess I'm kind of a hypocrite in that area. It was a first draft for us, but we did really struggle in that area, because we would have been too tired to really do all that work that we were tasked with doing by the end of the day. So there was a time that you couldn't get away from the term personalization at educational conferences going back 12, 15 years. The promise of that was never fully realized. In pretty much every case I'm aware of, personalization required lots of people in the background making it all look like magic, right? There was even a school that was famous for the students would walk in, they'd see a personalized slide for the day, and that was their task for the day, and it was all supposedly generated automatically, right? But what it actually was teachers working late into the night creating these individual slideshows for learners. And we've heard more examples of that, right? So at best, the Amazon checkout free just walk out stores weren't all they were cracked up to be, right? Amazon said its workers were tasked with annotating AI generated and real shopping data so they could improve their system. But by worst, one account was that they outsourced the labor and to review those purchases 70% of the time. And then there were claims about a bookkeeping software AI that a few years back was actually outsourcing work to humans as well, which explained the lag times and people waiting for the AI response. There were actually humans in the background doing the calculations. And so there, like I said, the school had hardworking teachers accomplishing to give the illusion of simplicity. We finally might have some of that simplicity now if we're using large language models for some of that. So some of the things that I've been able to get large language models to do might also seem like magic, but it took a lot of work, right? My hundreds, if not thousands, like I mentioned, of hours over the last 2 years, experimenting to my current set of practices that I do share. So I'll give you some places to look for that soon. So all of that's to say, if you're not quite there yet, if these large corporations with billions of dollars, some are seeking over $1 trillion behind them, don't have a handle on this yet, then you can give yourself a break, right? We're all still working on it. But my biggest mistake on my journey probably would have to be how I confronted my learners who were using them. So when I would have a student that I was just dead sure was using ChatGPT to do a submission, and I just sent the submission back and said, this is a ChatGPT response, you need to redo it. That harmed, I think, more relationships with my learners than anything I'd done before, because what would invariably happen is that the student would say, no, I didn't. Right? Even though I know they did, even though sometimes the response would even say, as a machine, I cannot sufficiently answer that question. There were clues right in the response. So if they say, no, they didn't, and I say, yes, you did, then what? And then it gets even trickier when the parent says, no, they didn't. I watched them do it. And then I know that they used it. So that back and forth, then there's no resolution there. So I had to be very careful then about how I responded to my learners in a way that was, this is starting to sound a lot like a large language model kind of submission. And I don't want you to be accused of that. I don't want you to sound like that, because it sends off a lot of red flags for your readers. So I had to really start changing my language and develop some nuance around my accusations. And they become more insinuations that this sounds like that. And I know that the detection tools are biased against marginalized student populations. I know that that's not something that I want to rely on. So then it becomes more of a conversation of, how do I organize these assignments in a way that allows for more back and forth in this asynchronous online setting, maybe a little easier to do in a classroom where you can see the students every day. But our traditional courses are just hopelessly broken. So we can try to address that, but we should also address the user experience beyond just some simple curriculum fixes, right? So part of the value of open source software is that we're able to customize the language in our LMS to revamp how our students see the content. We can create more guided pathways using quizzes that we no longer call quizzes. We can integrate H5P activities and create experiences that are more focused on walking learners through a step-by-step process than what traditional assignments are for. And without ChatGPT and Claude and our committee of curriculum writers that were working on this project with me last year, just constantly talking about that, we were able to then get ChatGPT to write that HTML code for us, to make the suggestions on where do we modify the Moodle language strings, and that collaboration and synergy between an open source model that we can edit and something like ChatGPT that can help us with the coding, writing our CSS for us so it looks pretty. There's a lot of time that went into just, I'm writing a Moodle page. I need to start at the H3 heading level, write the HTML for me. And even if you don't know what that means, it saves you a lot of time then when you're just taking that content and pasting it. Then there's no more formatting work that needs to happen on the other end. So it really helps speed up our process. There's something else I'll bring up in a little bit that really helps speed up our course creation. But just quickly, through our collaboration, we were talking about, could we have it write the directions for an H5P module for us? I know H5P is going to be presented here at the conference. So quick plug for that. So yeah, it allows us to create these interactive experiences, right? So we were talking about, could we just have it write some directions that we could copy and paste into these H5P modules while we're writing them? And I just thought for a second, I said, why not just see if it could write the whole H5P module itself? So I took an existing one and I uploaded it to ChatGPT and said, are you able to identify the content in this H5P activity? Because I had no idea if it could even read that file. Right. So it did. And then since it did, I said, can you create an H5P activity that I could upload somewhere else? And then there's my favorite phrase that I told you about earlier. This is vital to my career, and I greatly value your thorough analysis and insights. And then the response I got back, it's going to do a lot, right? It's going to run some Python code in the background. I had no idea what any of these lines of code shooting past me was like reading the Matrix, right? So it happened though. It created this activity for me using the terms that I wanted it to use. This was ChatGPT 4.0 or 4.0, whatever the latest model was. So this was back in May that I was able to do this. So I told it what kind of type of H5P. I told it the drag and drop options I wanted, and then it created it for me, saving me a ton of time, right? Some of these things take a while. The other thing that I thought was useful was that we can start having discussions with our data now. You could, assuming you're anonymizing the information, right? Like not putting students' identifiable information in, you could create a profile through each chat related just to that learner, create a number that aligns with their identity that you have listed somewhere else, and develop insights throughout the course of a school year around that student's work. That's something that I think would be enormously useful. But in the case of this other work, I'm often arguing with people around whether reading a book is the same as audio book, and the research indicates that your brain thinks it's the same, right? And I'm way into the accessibility conversation and education, so I want this conversation to happen. So I uploaded the study to ChatGPT and I said, can you give me a list of can you summarize the findings, give me some talking points? And it does that. And then I can say, can you suggest some important aspects of the findings when it comes to population with reading disabilities or vision impairments? And it'll give you a long list of that. How about for students who say they don't like to read? It'll give you lists of, identifying elements from the study that are supportive of that. So if I had just read the study, sure, I could have come up with some of those insights eventually, right? But the fact that I was able to get them in just a couple minutes allowed me then to kind of craft an argument and a response. And now this back and forth with information that I'm having is really interesting to me because I haven't been able to do that before. I haven't been able to talk to a study before and ask it questions. So that's exciting for me. Our face-to-face interactions are more important though than ever when we're trying to verify student understanding. So we have to make sure that these we're questioning these practices, right? We have to share with each other what has worked, what has not, where is it saving me time? And then we use AI to help us find the patterns, right? But those patterns are in the past. It's not going to help us innovate for the future, right? We're the innovators. We can do that. So where does the AI enhance our experiences, right? So what I do in my classes, I'm introducing more and more opportunities for student drafts. I'm having them use a submission statement where before they submit it says, this assignment is my own work, except where I've acknowledged the use of the works of other people or acknowledged the use of generative AI or translation tools to assist in the preparation of these materials. If I've used AI, I've described where and how. I want them using it, right? I just want them using it appropriately. So if they show me their work, then I can see where their prompts went wrong. I can give them suggestions. But there was some research that indicated years ago that if you had someone sign a statement, and this is in Moodle too, that if you don't play it, that you didn't plagiarize it, right? That people are less likely to submit an assignment that's been plagiarized. So I'm testing that kind of same idea out. The other thing that's saved me a ton of time is just as a small screenshot of a massive quiz bank I'm building in a seventh grade English class, where I've had ChatGPT write all of my Moodle questions in XML code so that I can just paste them into a text document, save them, and import them into Moodle. I can't tell you how much time that would have saved me because I never would have done it. I never would have taken the time to write those hundreds of questions one by one with the settings for each one, right? Like nobody does that. But I could have ChatGPT crank these out like crazy and just import them into the courses for students to use as practice and review. So I'm really excited about what happens with that next year. But we can even say using students doing work with AI. Why am I doing this? So it can give them some answers there. Give us support for accessibility and modifications, inclusive language, right? Like there's all this stuff that we can have ChatGPT help us do, Claude, Gemini, whatever it is, right? I happen to write a comic book, so I can have it create a marketing plan for my comic book. And the thing I want to leave you with just quickly is that you can get a default response, right? The BLT on the left is representative of something that many of us have probably had in the past, right? Just a very simple sandwich. If you ask ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini for a recipe for a BLT, you get something very much like that. Guidance on how to make it, sure, it'll tell you how to put it all together. But if you tell all of these tools, I am a classically trained French chef. I'm a graduate of Le Cordon Bleu. I'm hosting a dinner for the President of the United States and foreign dignitaries. I need an elevated BLT. You will get something wildly different, right? Just through the extra context of that prompt. And that's what I want to leave you with today, right? What is going to give our learners the gourmet BLT option? You can't just go into one of these tools and click create a lesson, right? That's garbage. The default version sucks for everything. Only to the extent we can customize it does it become useful to us, because we all serve different learning populations in different settings, right? We all have different personalities. We all have different delivery types. So how can we describe ourselves, the tool, our learners, the setting, the content, right? How can we make it more inclusive? All of those things start to layer in and add up to something that looks more like, that beautiful BLT on the right. And so that's what I want to leave you with today. If you want to see any of my examples, rubrics that I use to kind of disproportionately flag AI writing, or policies and practices that we use, whatever it is, modules you want to take, please reach out to me and follow up. I'd be happy to continue the conversation. And you can find me all over online. There's not many Jon Filas in the world. I think there might be 2 or 3. So I've got most of the web presence. So I will hang on. I know you've got 15 or now 12 minutes to your next session. I'd be happy to hang on the line till close to the top of the hour and answer any questions or hear any comments, feedback. Anyone want to argue? I'm here.
Hey, John, this is Fred. That was excellent. I really appreciate how much of your personal experience you shared with us. That gave us sort of window into what the reality is in terms of using with AI, and how you're faced with interacting with the students and some of the ways that you kind of thought through that. Look, we are here for a few minutes. If anybody has questions that they'd like to ask John, definitely reach out to him in his contact. But if you have any questions here, please just type them in the chat. Having given many of these presentations, it's always a pleasure to interact with the audience. And we would welcome any feedback that you have, and we hope you got some good insight from it. I see a few people typing in the chat.
Yeah, Matthias, I think it's really important that we aren't just blanketing. A lot of districts in the United States, we're blocking access to the tools, not just for students, but also for teachers. And I think that's short-sighted, right? I know we haven't had time to have the kinds of conversations we need to have about these tools, but people know how to get around those kinds of restrictions. So let's be realistic about it. Like, people are using them, and we can quickly try to determine what appropriate use is. And if we determine that it wasn't, then we change, right? But we can't just put our heads in the sand. Yeah, Joni, the way I think about this is that we have never had a technology that by default was uh, supportive and inclusive of marginalized populations. So I don't think these tools are any different. So, I want to be clear that, for whatever talk there is about how these tools might have a liberal bias, there's nothing more conservative than using everything about us from the past, right? And keep us grounded there. Thank you, Brian. Yeah. How do I perceive students' interest in AI for tasks, other assignments? Are they being creative about it, or is there use strictly for what teachers ask them? I think if we look at the user data from last year, we don't know what it has looked like in the last month from OpenAI, and there was a massive drop in use over the summer months because of all the students that went on break. I think that's probably going to happen again now. I would like for students to see use cases outside of school, right? I want them to see me writing social media posts for my comic book with it. I want them to see the marketing aspect. I want them to see that they could use it to develop a business plan, for instance. If in some assignments where they're asking students to create a board game, why not also then try to really go for it and create a marketable board game and put that idea out for others to purchase and have it help you create the website, have it help you code the website. I think there's enormous potential with these tools to see real world aspects of what they're doing. And even if the students aren't sure why they're doing something in class, they could paste in the objectives for that lesson and say, what does this matter, right? Who cares about this in the real world? Why would I ever use this in the future? And see what kind of list you generate. And if you didn't like the list, you can say, are there any more? And it'll give you more. It'll say, certainly, exclamation mark, and it'll give you another list. And so I actually, when I'm developing lessons now with the assistance of these tools, that's part of my process. There's always a why section at the top that has included some list. And a lot of times when I'm brainstorming using these tools, I end up using 0 of the suggestions. But those suggestions that I don't like prompt me to my solution, right? So it isn't that it's giving me the ideas. It's like, I had some Tai Chi instructors once that told me even bad teachers were good because they taught you how not to do things. And I think about that a lot with ChatGPT, right? Its ideas often aren't very good, but they help me, like when I'm reading them and critiquing them in my mind or discussing those terrible ideas with others, we get to the right idea, right? That's innovation, right? We use it as a collaborative partner. That's how that creative process works. It's the back and forth. It isn't just give me an answer and I'll use it. Like, that's boring. Nobody wants that.
Awesome, John. What I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest we stop the recording now. You're welcome to linger. The next session is about to start. And I'm going to just formally thank you again for the information that you shared with us. This was really good.
Thanks, everyone.